I agreed to be his fake date as a favor to my best friend. Just one evening, one dinner, no complications. But somewhere between the appetizers and the drive home, something shifted. And when he looked at me across that table, I was the only person in the room. I forgot every rule I'd ever made. If this story touches your heart, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another one. The whole thing started because of a family dinner I had no business attending. My best friend, Cassidy, called me on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, her voice carrying that particular mix of desperation and forced cheerfulness that I had learned to recognize over 11 years of friendship. She needed a favor, a big one. Her parents were hosting a dinner to celebrate her father's retirement, and her entire extended family would be there. The kind of family that asked questions, the kind of questions that made Cassidy want to disappear into the floorboards. "Just come as my date," she said. "Not a real date, just, a buffer. So Aunt Renata stops asking me why I'm still single at 29. I told her I would think about it, which with Cassidy means yes. I should explain who I am in this story. My name is Eli. Eli Voss. I am 31 years old. I work as a geospatial analyst for a regional planning firm in Richmond, Virginia. And I have been best friends with Cassidy Hargrove since we were both awkward 18-year-olds at orientation week at Virginia Commonwealth University. I am gay, openly so, and Cassidy has always been one of my loudest, most enthusiastic supporters. We have that kind of friendship where we show up for each other in the way that most people reserve for family, sometimes better than family. What I had not thought about when I agreed to the dinner was Cassidy's brother. His name was Barrett Hargrove. I had met him exactly twice in 11 years, once at Cassidy's college graduation and once at a 4th of July cookout 4 summers ago. Both times he had been polite, quiet, a little reserved. He was 3 years older than Cassidy, which made him 32. He had lived in Charlottesville for most of the past decade, working as a rare book conservator at a university library. He had a careful, precise quality about him, the kind of person who folded napkins properly and listened more than he spoke. I had not thought about him much. He was simply Cassidy's older brother, a background detail in the story of my best friend's life. And then I walked into the Hargrove family home on a cool Friday evening in early October, wearing my good navy blazer and carrying a bottle of wine I had agonized over for 20 minutes at the shop. And Barrett opened the front door. He had changed since the cookout, or maybe I had just never actually looked at him before. He was tall, with dark hair that had just a little gray starting at the temples, and warm brown eyes behind a pair of simple wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a deep green sweater and dark trousers, and he looked like someone who had stepped out of a magazine that was trying very hard not to look like a magazine. "You must be Eli," he said. His voice was steady and low. "Cassidy talks about you constantly." "Good things, I hope," I said. "Mostly," he said, and he smiled, just a small smile, but it reached his eyes. That was the first moment I noticed something I had not expected to notice. Inside, the house was warm and crowded. Cassidy's parents, Jim and Loretta Hargrove, were gracious and welcoming. Aunt Renata was exactly as advertised. A sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who assessed me in approximately 4 seconds and then declared with absolute certainty that Cassidy had finally found a good one. Cassidy shot me a look across the room that was equal parts apology and amusement. I smiled back. This was the job. I could do the job. What I had not accounted for was Barrett sitting directly across from me at dinner. The Hargroves had a long oak dining table that fit 12 people comfortably. Somehow, through the random chaos of family seating, I ended up next to Cassidy on one side and directly across from Barrett. For 2 hours, I ate roasted chicken and autumn vegetable gratin, and passed bread rolls and made polite conversation with people I had never met. And every so often I would glance up and Barrett would be looking at me. Not in a rude way, not in an obvious way. Just quietly watching the way a person watches something that interests them without quite being sure why. Once he caught me catching him. He looked away first. Then, a moment later, he looked back, and this time he didn't look away. He just gave me that small, careful smile again, like we shared a secret I hadn't been told about yet. After dinner, while Cassidy helped her mother with the dishes, and Aunt Renata had cornered Jim about his retirement plans, Barrett and I ended up on the back porch together. It was a cool night, clear, with the smell of fallen leaves in the air. Richmond in October has a particular kind of beauty. The old trees along the street going amber and gold, the air carrying just enough chill to make you want to stand close to something warm. Barrett handed me a glass of sparkling water. I had switched from wine an hour ago, and he had apparently noticed without making a point of it. "Thank you," I said. "I figured you might want something that wasn't wine," he said. "You stopped halfway through your second glass and I didn't see you refill." I looked at him. "You were paying attention." "I pay attention to things," he said simply, not bragging, just stating a fact about himself. We stood there for a moment looking out at the backyard. The Hargroves had a big oak tree at the back that Cassidy had told me she used to climb as a kid. Its leaves were deep red now, almost burgundy in the porch light. "So you're Cassidy's fake date," Barrett said. I turned to look at him. He was completely calm, watching the tree. "She told you," I said. "She didn't have to. I know my sister. And I know that she's been telling our aunt she's been seeing someone for 3 months and then needed to produce a person in 72 hours. He paused. "I also know she's been seeing someone she's not ready to introduce to the family yet." I blinked. "She didn't tell me that part." "She doesn't tell anyone everything," Barrett said. "But I've known her for 32 years. She's happier than she's been in a long time. Whoever this person is, they're good for her." I stood there holding my sparkling water and feeling a complicated mix of things. Surprised that I had missed something that's significant in Cassidy's life. Grateful that Barrett had said it so gently, without judgment. And something else, something harder to name, that had to do with the way he was standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of him in the cool October air. "She's lucky to have you," I said. "As a brother," he looked at me then directly. "She's luckier to have you as a friend," he said. "From what she tells me, you've shown up for her in ways that matter." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and somehow the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that happens between people who are both thinking the same thing, and neither one of them is ready to say it out loud. Inside, Loretta called that there was dessert, and the moment shifted, and we went back inside, and the evening moved on. But later, when I was driving home through the leafy streets of the Fan District, past the old row houses with their wide porches, and the corner coffee shops still glowing warm against the dark, I was still thinking about Barrett Hargrove, and the way he had looked at me like I was something worth paying attention to. And I was thinking about the fact that when he'd said good night, shaking my hand at the door, he'd held on for just a half-second longer than was strictly necessary. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself that for about 4 days. Then Cassidy called, because Cassidy always calls, and somewhere in the middle of telling her about a work project that was stressing me out, she said almost casually, "Barrett asked about you." "By the way," I stopped. "He did. He wanted to know if you were seeing anyone," she said, and her voice had a very careful, neutral quality that told me she was working hard to keep it that way. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him the truth," she said. "That you've been single for about 1.5 years and that you are, and I quote, emotionally available but situationally picky." I laughed despite myself. "That's an extremely specific quote." "I have a good memory," she said. "Eli, Cassidy," a pause, then quietly, "he's a good person, a genuinely good person. I just want you to know that if it matters." It mattered, and that was the problem. He called me himself 3 days later. I did not expect that. I had half convinced myself that whatever had happened on that porch was a warm evening and too much thinking and nothing more. And then my phone rang on a Wednesday morning while I was eating toast over my kitchen sink, and the name on the screen was Barrett Hargrove, and I stood there for 2 full rings before I answered. "I hope this isn't strange," he said. "Cassidy gave me your number. I asked her to." "It's not strange," I said. My toast was getting cold and I didn't care at all. "I'm in Richmond for the week," he said. "There's a collection at a private estate out in Goochland County that I've been asked to assess. Old volumes, some of them might be significant. But the work doesn't start until Thursday and I have today and tomorrow free." He paused just briefly. "I thought if you weren't busy you might want to show me around." I set down my toast. "You've been to Richmond before." "I have," he said, "but I've never seen it with you." I could feel my own heartbeat doing something unnecessary. I told him I'd meet him at noon. We spent the afternoon walking through Carytown, the long stretch of eclectic shops and restaurants west of the boulevard, where every block has something different to look at. Barrett was quiet but engaged, the kind of person who actually stops to read historical markers and then has something interesting to say about them. We went into a used bookshop on Elwood Avenue, one of those wonderful crowded shops where the books are stacked 2 deep on every shelf. and Barrett spent 40 minutes in there while I leaned against a shelf and watched him work through a section of 19th century natural history texts with the quiet focus of someone who does this. For love, not just for work. You really like this, I said. He looked up. Books, the care of them, I said. The preservation, you look at them like they're alive. He considered that. In a way, they are, he said. Every book someone has handled for 150 years has absorbed something of the people who held it. The wear patterns, the marginalia, the repairs. You can read a life and how a book has been treated. He paused. I find that comforting, I think. The idea that something can be preserved if you're careful enough with it. I looked at him for a long moment. That's a beautiful way to think about things. He looked back at me, and something passed between us that was too honest to pretend I didn't feel. We had coffee at a small place I liked on Nansemond Street, in the far end of the fan district, where the chairs are mismatched, and the windows are always a little fogged from the steam. We talked for 2 hours. About his work in Charlottesville, about my work translating geographic data into planning decisions that actually affect how people live in a city. About Cassidy, who was, we agreed, one of the best people either of us had ever known. About what it had been like growing up. About the things we'd gotten wrong in our 20s, and the things we were still figuring out in our 30s. At some point, the conversation turned to relationships. Carefully, gently, the way it does when two people are actually curious about each other but don't want to be clumsy about it. He had been in a long relationship that ended 2 years ago. His name was Douglas. They had been together for 5 years, and the ending had been quiet and mutual, the way some endings are, where both people slowly realize they have been building toward different lives. Barrett said it without bitterness, but also without pretending it hadn't cost him something. After that, I think I got very careful, he said. Maybe too careful. Careful isn't a bad thing, I said. No, he agreed. But it can become a habit that feels like wisdom when it's actually just fear. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. I know something about that. My own last relationship had been with a man named Victor, a physical education teacher. Good-hearted and funny, and ultimately not right for me in the ways that matter most. We had ended things 18 months ago, kindly and without drama, and I had been mostly fine since then. But Barrett was right that there was something that looked like caution, that was actually closer to having learned to keep myself at a safe distance from things I wanted. Can I say something honestly? Barrett asked. Please, I said. The night of that dinner, he said. I spent most of it trying to figure out if you were actually Cassidy's boyfriend or if you were doing her a favor. And then I spent the rest of it hoping it was the second one. He looked at me steadily. I'm telling you that because I think you should know where I'm standing. The coffee shop was warm and steamy, and outside the window a jogger went past in a red jacket, and the afternoon light was going long and golden across the sidewalk. I looked at Barrett Hargrove, this careful, precise, quietly remarkable man who noticed when I switched from wine to water, and who loved books like they were living things, and I thought, this is what it feels like when something is actually worth the risk. I'm glad it was the second one, I said. He smiled. The real version of that smile, wider than the careful one I'd seen before, and it changed his whole face. It made him look younger and warmer, and something I didn't have a word for that I wanted to keep looking at for as long as he would let me. We walked back through the neighborhood as the evening came on, past the old homes on Park Avenue with their deep front porches, past the corner where the tulip magnolias would bloom stupidly beautiful in the spring. He walked close to me, our shoulders nearly touching, and twice when we stopped to look at something, we turned to each other at the same time, close enough that I was aware of every inch of the small space between us. At the end of the evening, standing beside his rental car on a quiet street corner, with the trees above us just barely holding their leaves, he asked if I wanted to have dinner on Thursday after he'd finished at the estate in Goochland. Not as Cassidy's anything, he said, just as two people who want to spend more time together. Yes, I said. I want that. He nodded, and I could see in his face that he was pleased and trying to be measured about it and not quite succeeding, and I liked him enormously for that. But then Thursday morning arrived, and with it, a complication I had not seen coming. Cassidy called me at 7:30. The carefully neutral voice was gone. Something was cracking through it, something fragile, and also, underneath that, something that sounded like joy trying to contain itself. I need to tell you something, she said. Something I should have told you before. The person I've been seeing, the one I wasn't ready to introduce to anyone yet. Yes, I said slowly. Her name is Nadia, Cassidy said. And I think I might be in love with her. And I haven't told my family yet, and I'm terrified. And I needed you to know first because you're my person, Eli. You always have been, and I don't know how to do this without. Cassidy, I said. Breathe, she breathed. I love you, I said. And I am so proud of you for telling me, and everything is going to be okay. She cried a little. I let her. Then I asked her to tell me about Nadia. And she did, for 30 beautiful minutes, her voice going warm and bright in the way that voices do when people talk about someone they love. Nadia was a landscape photographer, originally from Roanoke, currently based in Richmond, steady and kind, and apparently able to make Cassidy laugh until she couldn't breathe. From everything Cassidy described, she sounded wonderful. When she finished, I sat with her on the phone for another few minutes in comfortable quiet. I'm going to tell my parents soon, she said. I'm almost ready. I'll be there when you do if you want me to be, I said. I know you will, she said. That's why you're my person. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a while, thinking about all the ways this changed things and all the ways it didn't. Cassidy had been carrying something big and private, and now I could carry it with her, which is what best friends are for. I thought about Barrett, too, about what he had said on the porch, that she was happier than she'd been in a long time, and I understood now what he had seen that I had missed. He knew his sister. He had known something was different without needing to be told. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. She told me, I said. Ah, he said, a long pause. Then gently, how is she? Scared, happy, ready, I think, even if she doesn't quite believe she is yet. Good, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. That's good. We were both quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm still planning on dinner tonight if you are. I am, I said. Absolutely. That evening should have felt simple. In some ways, it was. We went to a small Italian restaurant in Oregon Hill, a neighborhood I loved for its old-school Richmond character. The tight streets and the modest homes, and the sense that the city's history was still present there. The restaurant was on Bow Street, family-owned, with tables covered in white paper and a menu that changed with the season. We ordered too much food and ate most of it and talked in the easy, connected way that I was already starting to think of as distinctly ours. But here is what I did not expect. Halfway through the evening, I realized I was happy. Not performing happiness, not feeling something cautious that might become happiness with time. Just genuinely, quietly, presently happy, in the specific way that happens when you are in the right place with the right person, and all of you knows it. And then Barrett reached across the table and covered my hand with his, very simply, very deliberately, and looked at me and said, I don't want to stop seeing you when I go back to Charlottesville. The candle on the table flickered. Outside, a car went past on the street. Somewhere in the kitchen, something wonderful smelled like garlic and rosemary. Then don't, I said. He turned my hand over and held it properly, his fingers warm and steady around mine, and the loop I had opened in my chest the night I first met him on that porch finally, quietly, began to close. Charlottesville is 80 miles from Richmond. I learned that distance precisely in the weeks that followed because I drove it more often than I had ever planned. Sometimes he drove it. Sometimes we met in the middle, in a small town called Zion Crossroads that had a decent diner and a gas station, and nothing else worth mentioning except that it was halfway between the two of us, which made it feel, those early weeks, like the most important dot on a map. What we built was slow and deliberate, which was right for both of us. Barrett was, by nature, someone who moved carefully. And I had spent long enough keeping myself at a safe distance from real things that I needed the slowness, needed to feel each step solidly underfoot before I took the next one. So we built it the right way. Phone calls most evenings, texts throughout the day, never demanding, always warm, driving the 80 miles when we could. He showed me Charlottesville properly in November, the way I had shown him Richmond. The downtown mall, the long pedestrian brick street lined with restaurants and shops and street musicians, with the Blue Ridge Mountains just visible at the end of it like a promise. The university grounds, where he had worked for 7 years and knew every path and courtyard. A small cidery out in the countryside east of town, where we sat at a picnic table in the cold November air drinking warm mulled cider and talking about everything and nothing for 3 hours, while the mountains went purple in the fading afternoon. Light. It was on one of those visits that he showed me where he worked. The conservation lab was in a lower level of one of the library buildings, a quiet, carefully controlled room where the temperature and humidity were kept constant, and the light was calibrated, and everything felt very still. He showed me a 17th century atlas he'd been working on. Its leather cover cracked and faded, but its maps still vivid inside, hand-colored in blues and greens, and a particular shade of faded gold. He explained what he was doing to stabilize it, the process of cleaning and humidifying and supporting the binding, the way each decision had to account for what had already been done to the book by previous hands, some of it helpful and some of it not. You have to understand the whole history, he said, before you can treat the damage. He was talking about the book. I was thinking about people. Barrett, I said. He looked up from the atlas. I really like you, I said. I want to be clear about that. I really like you and I want to keep doing this. He set down the tool he was holding carefully and looked at me with those steady brown eyes. I really like you too, he said. I think you know that. I do, I said. I just wanted to say it out loud in case it helped. He smiled, the wide version. It helps. In December, Cassidy told her parents. She did it on a Saturday afternoon, and she had asked me to be there, and I was. I drove out to the Hargrove house in the short pump area, where her parents had retired to a comfortable place with a big kitchen garden that Jim tended obsessively, and a sunroom where Loretta kept more houseplants than seemed reasonable. Barrett drove down from Charlottesville. None of us announced we were coming together. It just happened that way because of course it did. Cassidy sat at the kitchen table with her parents and told them about Nadia. She was calm and clear and honest and braver than she had any obligation to be. Jim was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that you can't always read from the outside. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over Cassidy's and said, "Are you happy?" "Yes," she said. "I am. Then that's what matters," he said. Loretta was already crying in the way that mothers sometimes cry at honesty, not from sadness but from something that has nowhere else to go. She pulled Cassidy into a hug that lasted a long time. I stood in the doorway to the kitchen and felt my own eyes doing something embarrassing, and next to me, Barrett's hand found mine without either of us looking at each other. It was the first time we'd held hands in front of his family. Loretta noticed on her way to get a tissue, and she stopped and looked at us, and her face did something complicated and then very warm. "Oh," she said, simply that. "Oh, good." Later, the five of us had dinner together, just the family and me, and Nadia joined us at the end of the evening, Cassidy's hand reaching for hers the moment she walked through the door. Nadia was exactly as Cassidy had described, warm, grounded, quick to laugh. She and Jim talked about gardening for 20 minutes. She won Loretta over in about 4 sentences. Barrett watched his sister across the table with an expression that was careful and full of love, and I watched him watch her, and felt something settle in me that I hadn't known was unsettled. After dinner, Barrett and I sat on the same back porch where we'd first really talked, 2 months earlier. It was cold now, genuinely cold, and we were both in our coats. The oak tree had lost all its leaves and stood bare against a clear December sky, and the stars were very bright. "I want to say something," Barrett said. "Say it," I said. "I know we've been taking this slowly, and I think that's been right. I don't regret any of it." He turned to look at me. "But I also don't want to keep treating this like something provisional, like something that might not last, because I don't feel that way. I feel the opposite." I waited because he wasn't done. "I'd like you to come to Charlottesville for Christmas," he said. "Not as a favor to anyone, not as a buffer, just as the person I want to be with, spending the holiday with me." The winter air was cold and clean around us. Inside the house, I could hear Cassidy laughing at something, that real laugh, the unguarded one, and it sounded like everything working out the way it was supposed to. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd really like that," he nodded. And then, after a moment, he put his arm around me, and I leaned into him. And we sat there in the cold for a while, looking up at the stars over the bare oak tree, not needing to say anything else. Christmas in Charlottesville was quiet and perfect. Barrett had a small house near the Barracks Road area, older construction, with wood floors and deep windowsills where he kept a few plants, and a stack of books he was currently reading. He had a fireplace that actually worked, and a kitchen that smelled like coffee in the morning, and whatever he was slow cooking by afternoon. It snowed on Christmas Eve, lightly, the kind of snow that dusts everything white without causing any real trouble. And we walked downtown in the early evening to see the lights along the mall, snow catching in our hair, the mountains invisible behind low clouds and all the shop windows glowing warm. He held my hand the whole way. The new year came, and with it the conversations that couples have when they are deciding what they are. Barrett and I had those conversations carefully and honestly, in the way that two people do when they have both learned from the past without being imprisoned by it. We talked about the distance and what it would take to close it eventually. We talked about what we each needed. We talked about the specific rhythms of his work and mine, the ways they were compatible, and the ways they would need flexibility. None of it was simple, but all of it felt possible, which is the thing that matters. In February, he came to Richmond for a long weekend, and we went to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts on a Saturday morning when it was too cold to do much else. There was an exhibition of early American maps, hand-drawn surveys of territories that had not yet been fully named, and Barrett stood in front of them for a long time, very still, reading the contour lines and the notation, and the careful cartographic script with the same focused attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. "What do you see?" I asked. "Someone trying to make sense of something too large to fully see," he said, "trying to put limits around a thing so they can understand it." He paused, "and getting it mostly right, considering what they had to work with." I thought about that for a moment. About the maps we make of our own lives, the lines we draw to make things manageable, and how sometimes what we map turns out to be different from the territory itself, how the territory is always larger than the map, and how you have to keep going out into the unmapped parts, even when they're uncertain, if you want to actually live in the world rather than just in your understanding of it. "I love the way you think," I said. He looked at me sideways, that small, careful smile. "I love the way you say things like that without seeming to realize you've said something remarkable." We stood there in front of a 200-year-old map of a place we both called home, and everything felt very clear and very certain in the way that only the best things do. By spring, the distance between Richmond and Charlottesville had started to feel less like an obstacle and more like a rhythm we had built our lives around. He knew which coffee shop I liked on Nansemond Street. I knew the exact table in his favorite Charlottesville restaurant where the light was best. We knew each other's work schedules and the telltale signs of a stressful week, and what the other person needed on those evenings when everything felt too heavy. We knew each other in the ways that count. Cassidy met Nadia's parents in March, and by all accounts it went beautifully. She called me afterward, laughing and crying at the same time, and I put her on speaker and let Barrett hear it too, and we both sat smiling at my kitchen table while she talked. "You two are disgustingly happy," she told us when she noticed we were both on the call. "You're one to talk," Barrett said. She laughed. It was the realest sound in the world. I think about that first evening a lot. The dinner I went to as a favor, carrying a bottle of wine I'd worried too hard about, wearing my good blazer for a role I'd agreed to play. I think about the porch and the cold air and the bare yard, and the way Barrett had handed me a glass of water without making it a moment of anything other than simple attention. I think about how many things that evening could have been, and how grateful